Recently, I started posting a weekly video series featuring different Native American heirloom food crops. These are foods that have been grown by Native American cultures for thousands of years, everything from devil's claw, amaranth, panic grass, wild peppers, tobacco, cotton, and the three sisters, corns, beans, and squash. Well, many consider this to be the fourth sister. These are sunflowers. They were first domesticated around 3600 BC, and they originally were collected from these tiny little wild ancestors or wild progenitors. I found these seeds growing along the road in the Columbia Gorge, so they're considered a weed by some, but the Native Americans would collect these tiny little seeds as a food source. The seeds are really healthy. They're rich in protein, vitamin B, vitamin E, folic acid, calcium, iron, zinc, and selenium. So you can see why they were collected and eaten. And over time, they would select these tiny little seeds for different traits, and those would develop into different heirloom varieties. This is my favorite Native American heirloom variety. These are Hopi dye sunflowers. They're not only grown for the seeds, but the husks contain a natural dye, which is used to dye cotton, wool, basketry. You soak these seeds in water, and it turns the water a dark purple color. So when you harvest these, your hands turn completely purple. Really interesting use, both as a food source and a natural dye. This next variety here has an interesting history. Sunflowers were first brought over to Europe in 1510, and in 1832 Prince Alexander Philip Maximilian brought different Native American varieties from the Mandan, Arikara, and others back to Germany, where they started pressing them for oil. And when they brought the seeds back to the United States, they called them Russian mammoths. So these are Russian mammoth sunflower seeds. They grow huge. They're over 10 feet tall. Some of the sunflower heads have between 15 and 20 inches wide, I've measured. Just huge, and a lot of seeds, and a really interesting variety that I like to grow in my garden. Now this next variety has a really big long seed. These are called Mongolian giants. I was given these several years ago, and I only grew these for 1 year. I grew these next to the Hopi dye sunflower seeds, and I couldn't believe what I got. The seeds I planted looked just like this, but when the flowers came, they had these seeds. These are a hybrid between the Hopi dye and the Mongolian giant. So I have now a giant dye seed, and these are great. They're huge flowers, so you can get a ton of dye from them. The seeds are really good, and again, when you harvest these, your fingers will be purple. A really interesting variety, and I love growing all these different ones. So next I'll take you to the garden and show you some of the actual sunflower plants. It's early in the season and we're just starting to get flowers. Some of these overwinter and just pop up as volunteers, and some of these I intentionally plant. So let's head over and take a look at them. So here's my garden. I have a lot of crops growing here, all kinds of ancient grains, squash, corn, and if you notice along the edge I have a natural fence of sunflowers. These are these mammoth sunflowers. They're between 7 and 8 feet tall right now, and they'll get even taller. They haven't really started putting on a flower yet. Right now they're just forming a huge stalk. At the base of all these mammoth sunflower stalks, I have climbing beans. These are scarlet runner beans, and they'll just go right up to the top of those sunflowers, make a huge wall of beans and sunflowers. And I like these even better than corn. You can grow beans up corn, but sunflower stalks are much more sturdy and can handle the weight of all the beans. Here I have an amaranth where those climbing beans climbed up the amaranth and then jumped over to the sunflowers. So definitely a great thing to have these stalks in here, because then you don't have to put up any structures or support for the beans. They'll just climb right up the sunflowers. So as you can see, the garden's starting to get out of control. I got amaranth and corn growing everywhere, and then I have wild sunflowers and Hopi dye sunflowers. I did not plant these here. These are just seeds that fell to the ground last season and volunteered. So a resilient plant. I collected these out of the wild, but they do great in the garden. And these tiny little flowers attract a lot of bees and pollinators, and we can harvest those tiny seeds if the birds don't get to them first. Here's one of my Hopi dye Mongolian giant sunflower hybrids. It's one of the first to flower. These flowers can get much larger than this, and you got to be kind of careful when you harvest these. If you just cut them off and let them dry on the flower, sometimes they'll mold. So I'll show you in a later video how I harvest these seeds, but for now it's nice just seeing them. The birds will come in and try to take these, so you got to monitor them, see when they're ripe, and then take them and harvest them. The final Native American heirloom food crop that I wanted to mention here is a whole different species of sunflower called sunchokes or Jerusalem artichokes. And they have an attractive yellow flower. The pollinators love them, the kids love to come and pick them, but they're not grown for seeds. The seeds are really tiny. This plant is grown for the tubers or the roots underground, which contain complex carbohydrates called inulins, so they're kind of sweet. Some say they're difficult to digest and may cause gas, but overall they're a really good food source that can store for a long period of time, and Native Americans ate them throughout the winter. They can be eaten cooked or raw. And I didn't plant these from seeds. I started these from tubers that I got at the store for eating. I simply put them in the ground, and within a few weeks they grew roots and put out shoots and started growing into plants. You do want to be cautious when growing these though. I don't put them in the garden because they spread and can become invasive. So I plant them only in container gardens or in controlled environments. But overall, a great food crop that can make a lot of food that stores for a long period of time. A really cool sunflower.